everybody see the first slide? I hope so. Right, so yes, good morning and thanks for tuning in to Temple's latest Construction Forum webinar. I'm Howard Waples, Director at Temple, and as some of my areas are in interests lay in climate change and human health, I'm delighted to introduce this session on reducing air quality and carbon emissions of major projects. So to share the benefits of their experience, we've brought together 4 expert speakers today who will be running through real-world examples of measures and approaches used at a project level to combat emissions from both construction and operational aspects. So Andy Haig from Canary Wharf Contractors, Mark Fenton and Neil Waite from HS2, and in a change to the proposed billing, Richard Lane has just had a baby, so it will be Alice McLean instead. And then we've allowed 25 minutes at the end for Q&A, so please do start sending through some questions using the chat function. All right, for any of you who don't know Temple, we're a specialist independent environmental planning, ecology and sustainability consultancy who work across a number of sectors, urban regen, transport and rail, and in the public sector, often in advisory roles. We're fortunate enough to be involved with the development life cycle from the very beginning, from policy to strategy development, through baseline surveys and monitoring, doing the actual impact assessments themselves, identifying mitigation and enhancements. And then throughout the construction programme, often administering things like construction environmental management plans and so on. We always try to put the community and the environment at the heart of all decision making wherever we can. And we form part of a wider group of companies who provide a range of specialist services as shown on this slide. So we've got experience in anything from digital stakeholder engagement to acoustics and vibration monitoring, health impact assessment and EIA, to the design of green infrastructure and tree surveys. However, today we're going to be focusing on the air quality and climate part with some help from our speakers. However, before I hand over to Andy, I just want to share a couple of thoughts based upon some things I've recently seen and reminding everyone that this all comes back to health and well-being at the end of the day. So the first one is the almost miraculous improvement in air quality most urban dwellers anyway experienced in the immediate aftermath of the coronavirus lockdown. As you can see on this slide, a few before and after pictures. Clearly, these caused havoc for trying to establish an accurate air quality baseline, as I'm sure Alice will agree. But if you're like me, you wouldn't have minded really. And it definitely helped a lot of people get out and do a bit of exercise. However, what I think is interesting is the emerging relationship between poor air quality, obesity and mortality from COVID-19. Given that the government is investing about $2 billion into pop-up cycle lanes and has recently embarked upon a quite far-reaching obesity strategy, featuring overweight people being prescribed bike rides. So I do wonder whether they're planning to do more to protect the people using these active travel modes from the air pollution that seems to be creeping back up again. The other one is related to climate change and global temperature rise, which is arguably going to have an even more fundamental effect on people's health than air quality alone, through extreme weather, food shortages, population upheaval, and physiological effects such as heat strokes, cardiovascular, respiratory diseases. However, what I saw last week, the latest international study on climate change forecasting, has actually now concluded they've got less uncertainty within the available modelling. What that means is that until now, the United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change thought there was a 66% chance heating the planet by between 1.5 to 4.5 degrees from doubling of CO2 from pre-industrial levels, which is pretty huge range. So the good news is now that there's a 66% chance of a narrow band of temperatures to plan for, and the new modelling isn't showing the 5+ degrees that other modelling has also been showing. However, the bad news is that there's now a 60% chance of between still 2.6 and a 3.9% degree increase, at which there's still going to be pretty scary outcomes. So with that in mind, clearly it's essential to do much more and as quickly as possible to develop ways to reduce carbon and GHGs. So without further ado, I'll pass you on to our first speaker, Andy Haig from Canary Wharf Contractors.
Hello, thank you for that. Can you hear me? Can you see me?
Yeah.
Perfect. That's the first technical challenge over. I'm now going to try and share my screen. Can people see my slide in full screen mode as well?
Yeah.
Yes. Okay, perfect. Well, thank you very much for that, and thank you for the introduction. I am Andy Haig from Canary Wharf Group. I have two hats. So I officially work for Canary Wharf Contractors, which is the contracting arm of Canary Wharf Group. So Canary Wharf, I'm sure most people know, is a major commercial centre to the east of London, who own, operate, and obviously more importantly, build and construct the Canary Wharf estate. So in my 15 minutes, I'm going to try and evenly divide it between kind of a 5 minutes of why air quality is so important to us, 5 minutes about kind of the more general what we're doing around air quality, and then 5 minutes talking about how we're combining our carbon reduction strategy and air quality through kind of progressing and making change in the supply chain. So air quality for a while now has been a USP at Canary Wharf. Obviously, the importance of air quality has really grown in prominence in the last few months since people have gone into lockdown and the kind of the press and the media. But actually, for a long time prior, we've been trying to address and promote the positive benefits of air quality because, as you can see from, people can see my mouse, but this green ring, that's where Canary Wharf is. And this map is from Imperial College London, looking at average annual NO2 concentrations across the city. Darker is worse, bluer and lighter is better. And as you can see, we are very favourable in terms of the city and Westminster. So we use air quality to sell space at Canary Wharf, and we have been doing for a while. Do people historically pick up on that? Not necessarily. It's something that we see the value in and we've been promoting, but would I say all bankers and lawyers and the types of tenants we're trying to attract, would they have historically seen the value of air quality? Air quality used to just be the way of doing business in the city of London, but now people are seeing that it does have a real impact on health and people's well-being. So it is a USB, and it has been for us for a while. We try and promote the fact that our air is cleaner and better than working in the city. And as you've already alluded to, air quality is now making front page news, much more so than it has in the past. It has been linked to the greater prevalence of serious COVID cases in areas with poor air quality, particularly NOx and SOx and PMs 2.5s and 10s. So basically around poor external air quality through road traffic, etc., is causing more severe COVID cases. I'm sure everyone knows that, and that's why we're signing up to this event, but it means that historically when we were going and talking to people about how good air quality was, if no one cared 6 months ago or 2 years ago, people really do care now. People are much more aware of the impact. And also, as you alluded to, people have seen the impact. They've seen it in the quality and the crispness of the air. Even my wife commented that the trees were greener 2-3 weeks after lockdown because the air was cleaner and you could actually, colours and sights and smells and everything were more defined. And so we know that previously poor air quality is just a means of doing business in the city, and now people have started to realise that we don't have to live in a poor air quality environment. Everyone bands around this whole build back better scenario. So how do we build back better to ensure that we don't meet so the green lines at the top of 2019 and the red lines are 2020, and we don't want to return to those green lines. We want to make sure that we are operating in a cleaner environment. And there's also, we're now encouraging people to come back. Also, the government's now encouraging people to go back to work, to kind of repopulate our cities, which are ghost towns. But there is a risk that if we don't do it right, we're not going to go back to that 2019 target. We're going to exceed it. So this came from financial news, but there's lots of press about it, or more generally about, city workers are being encouraged, or not just city workers, office workers are encouraged to protect themselves and get off public transport and then use cars instead. So if as part of the recovery we don't do it intelligently, that will have a significant negative impact on air quality. So in summary, air quality has always been a USP at Canary Wharf. It's ever more prevalent in the importance of it, and we're now starting to see worrying signs that we could not even just return to normal, but return to a worse scenario, a worse case, if we don't do something. So that's about 5 minutes, good. What does that mean for construction? So as I said, Canary Wharf contractors are the construction arm of Canary Wharf Group. This is a picture of our Wood Wharf site, and as you can see, we are right in the middle of Canary Wharf. We've got a development pipeline of over 30 projects on land just north of the estate, but as you can see, it's literally next door, so it's not geographically separate. We're right on top of the estate, and we're very much a customer-driven business. The way we make money is selling the best possible operating environments to our tenants. So that means, the best technology, the best access, the best retail options, but also the best air quality and services and kind of outdoor areas. So because of that, that's why air quality has always been so important to us and how we deliver against it. And that includes both the impact of our the plant on our construction sites, but also the traffic coming to and from the site. So it's not just our direct impacts, but it's also that kind of direct impact of moving goods and services to and from our construction sites as well. So what do we do? I'd like to say we're doing everything that's super innovative and awesome and amazing, and here's everything that no one's ever seen before, but a lot of air quality is just good practice. I've written best practice, but a lot of it's just good practice. So we write air pollution considerations into our specs. We get, as part of the tendering pack, so as part of the method statements, as part of the risk assessments, we get our trades to consider their air pollution impacts. That could be trips to and from the estate, including deliveries, including people movements. It could be the emissions associated with plant on site. It could be chemical off-gassing, it could be dust suppression. We get them to think about the holistic nature of their activities and that potential impact on air pollution. We have a delivery management system to try and ensure just on time delivery, to try and ensure that we don't have peaks of vehicles coming during rush hour, and try and balance that flow across the portion of the day. Preference for electric equipment, and I don't mean hybrid diggers, of which there's one that kind of goes around the country and everyone has for 15 minutes before it moves on to the next one. I'm talking about all of our sites are run off electricity straight from the off, so you don't have generators, you don't have fuel bowsers and stuff coming onto site. Yes, we do and are trying to push for hybrid heavy plant, but actually just removing generators and bowsers has a significant impact as well. And then, simple things like damping down, dust suppression, all of that type of good practice stuff. Which is all well and good, and it's easy to say, but the importance is, being dogged and going in and checking it and getting, making sure our team are up to speed on it. We do have environmental managers on each of our sites, but actually it's not just them, it's, the logistics managers, it's the construction managers, it's our health and safety managers, trying to ensure that it's kind of written in and delivered. And that's why I think out of all of those bullet points, the second top one's the most important. Making sure it's written into specs, making sure you're engaging with your trades at the tender stage, at kickoff stage, at regular team meetings. So we attend the health and safety meetings and we talk about air pollution there as well. And then, everyone talks about FORS and NRMM. Do you actually do your compliance checks? Do you actually make sure stuff's compliant? And I think data is key. So it's not just managing the people and the operatives on site, but it's actually being able to record the benefits of that or the impacts of that. So at the top here, this is actually the operational estate rather than the construction estate, but we have diffusion tube monitors capturing average nitrogen dioxide concentrations across the estate. So those are impacted by predominantly car usage and diesel emissions. So we're monitoring across the estate the level of NOx concentrations. But more importantly for construction, we have 7 live boundary monitors which are taking kind of constant readings of, well, for us the most important thing is dust, but also noise and vibration in some points. So we know for construction, dust is probably our biggest direct impact for our customers, which is why at the boundaries of our construction sites we have dust monitors looking at PM10, but actually it doesn't say, but also does PM2.5 as well. So we are monitoring our impact. If we go above our agreed thresholds, we have obviously stop works and review and remedy the situation. And we also have very good connections to our tenants. So if they see dust or any forms of activities, then we can kind of engage with them. And similarly, most importantly, the building managers of these estates provide regular checks of the filtration of the incoming air. So they get to see if there's anything happening as well. So we've got kind of multiple fail-safes or checks when we're talking to and engaging to make sure that our tenants are not impacted by our construction activities. So this is great for us, but also this is great for us to engage with our supply chain and show them that, you know, we've got a project which is, I don't know if you can see my mouse, but kind of the top of this site here. So we're monitoring the impact that that has on the neighbouring buildings and also the houseboats in the Blackwall Basin as well. So we can be very proactive with our discussions around air quality and the impacts that we may or may not be having. And because air quality has always been such an important factor at Canary Wharf, we may be more on top of it than other contractors or other construction sites, but especially if you live in the City of London, you can't really get away with it for much longer. The ultra low emission zone is increasing, so it's basically covering the whole of Greater London, and that comes with it a fairly hefty daily charge if lorries are coming to site that aren't that are the kind of the more polluting. So there's £100 daily charge if a lorry is coming to site as of the 21st of October next year, which if you times that by the 100 odd lorries that are coming to your site, that's a very, very significant investment. So while some sites are really taking air quality on board, I think in a very short space of time, you're just not going to be able to ignore the fact that you need to be thinking about what's, you know, your deliveries to and from site, but also what you're doing on site. So I think I'm overrunning, so I'll try and cut this down to about 2 or 3 minutes. But I really wanted to talk about as well how we're connecting our other strategies and other methods of work, sustainability strategies with air quality to help to kind of drive change. So we've recently had our science-based target approved. For those who don't know what science-based targets are, very quickly, it's a carbon reduction target in line with the latest climate science to reduce global warming to less than 1.5 degree. So it's in line with the kind of Paris Protocol, and yeah, we've had that agreed 2-3 months ago. And importantly, our secondary target, which I've highlighted here, means that as Canary Wharf Group, not Canary Wharf Contracts, but as Canary Wharf Group, we commit that 60% of our suppliers by emissions impact will have a science-based target by 2025. And funnily enough, at Canary Wharf Group, the greatest impacts and the greatest spend is in obviously construction. So the environmental, the carbon emissions impact of our construction arm is, I think it was 70 or 80% of the total. So what we need to do now is really drive carbon reduction emissions across our supply chain. Why is that important? Because carbon emissions are essentially, very simply, they're fossil fuel emissions. When you burn a fossil fuel, you also generate a lot of NOx, a lot of SOx, some PM 2.5s and some PM 10s, but equally PM 2.5 and 10 also come from the use of heavy plant and machinery rolling around site and rolling to site from brake dust and tyre wear and things like that as well. So getting our supply chain to understand their carbon emissions and make a significant reduction in that will have a very obvious spin-off to air quality, both localized and national. So since having our, getting our target approved was the easy part, what we're now trying to do is understand what the scale of the challenge is for that second target. So the first step was to understand who our biggest hitters are, and funnily enough, the biggest emissions impact of our supply chain are, the biggest package types. So it's kind of groundworks, it's structural steels, it's cladding, it's the big packages which have a lot of lorries, a lot of muck shift movements, a lot of deliveries of heavy bits of material, and a lot of installation time. So that means getting them to understand and reduce their carbon emissions on site, and also as a business will have obviously very clear air quality improvements. And so we're engaging at director level with those big firms. But more importantly, we're getting trades to understand at a much broader level their emissions impact and the associated costs to those impacts. So we've been working with the Supply Chain Sustainability School on developing a trade-specific carbon reporting methodology. And this isn't just Canary Wharf contractors, this is a much broader partner-led initiative with the Supply Chain School. So getting trades to understand their emissions, understanding how much they're spending on fuels on site, how much they're spending on powering their diggers and tippers by not, by letting them idle and not switching them off. And then for me, going back to the whole data bit, it's all about monitoring those emissions on site, monitoring the use of plants, the ongoing NOx, ongoing dust, etc., and rewarding reductions to the operatives, and ultimately driving innovation. So in summary, air quality has been important to us for a while, but it's never been more important as a business, as a industry, and across the UK. And we are really playing on the fact that construction impacts, we're not looking at just the workforce, we're not looking at the health and well-being of site operatives, but we're really selling it as the driver for us is the wider community. And if we can use that as a lever to get greater change and improvement in air quality on construction site, the spin-off is obviously protecting the workforce and everything that goes around it. But as we know that selling the best service to the community, we're using that as our driver to drive an improvement, if that makes sense. And then, rather than just talking about air quality, we're talking about carbon. We're trying to connect it to all these other business strategies, which means there's potentially a greater pot of money to invest, but also there's greater driver incentive across our kind of senior management to kind of really progress with it. And that is it from me. Sorry if I've overrun, but yeah, hopefully that gives you a bit of a broad understanding of what we're trying to do. I don't think it's rocket science, but I think it is, it's just doing the right things and making sure you're kind of really hammering it home and reiterating the point. Thank you.
Thanks, Andy. So hopefully you guys can see my slides now. So I'm Mark Fenton, I'm climate change specialist at HS2 Limited. I lead on the carbon reduction agenda, looking across the whole life carbon emissions, construction and operation. So just quickly a bit, what is HS2? So HS2 is the UK's new high-speed railway, and HS2 Limited is the company that's responsible for programme management of the planning, consultation, design and construction of HS2. HS2 Limited also acts as the future infrastructure manager and the network operator for the HS2 infrastructure. And we're delivering HS2 in phases. So in 2017, we were granted the powers by Parliament to begin the construction of phase 1, and that'll be the new high-speed line between Birmingham and London. And in July 2017, we awarded main work civil contracts for construction to 4 joint ventures, and they've been developing the design. Earlier this year, we issued notice to proceed, and that moves us into the detailed design and the construction phase for phase 1 of the civil works. And we currently have enabling works underway at the moment. So that's things like ecological and archaeology surveys, utility and road diversions, groundworks and site clearances. We also have a bill to gain the powers to construct phase 2A, so that'll extend the high-speed line from Birmingham to Crewe, and that's currently in Parliament. And then another hybrid bill to extend HS2 from Crewe to Manchester is being prepared, alongside a review of the route from Birmingham to Leeds to ensure that it's fully integrated with Northern Powerhouse Rail and Midlands Engine Rail schemes and the Trans-Pennine route. So why is the railway necessary? Well, Britain's railways are full, so we need to meet the rising demand, we need to run more trains. And when HS2 is up and running, we expect HS2 trains to carry over 300,000 people a day. So that's over 100 million people a year. I know HS2 will improve your journey even if you don't actually use our trains or if you don't live along the route. And it'll do that by shifting long distance services onto the brand new line. HS2 will release space on the current network, and that can be used by more trains on local and regional routes, with over 100 existing rail stations set to benefit. It's also about better connectivity. HS2 is an integrated system. It will form the backbone of the UK's transport network, connecting 8 out of 10 of Britain's largest cities. And HS2 trains will serve over 25 stations, so connecting around 30 million people. But it's also about cutting carbon, and HS2 will help the UK's fight against climate change and the drive to reach net zero carbon emissions. HS2 is a low carbon mode of transport. It'll offer some of the lowest carbon emissions per passenger kilometre, and the extra capacity that HS2 creates on existing lines will take hundreds of thousands of cars and lorries off the roads, and that will reduce the need for internal flights, and that will cut carbon emissions, improve air quality and ease congestion. So HS2 is very much part of the solution to the emission reduction challenge in the transport sector. As I say, HS2 is a low carbon mode of transport, and actually it's a net zero ready mode of transport. So in the future, with the grid supplying 100% zero carbon energy, journeys on HS2 will be zero carbon. And we're currently looking at an energy procurement strategy which would aim to deliver zero carbon journeys from day one of operation. And importantly, HS2 can also support the decarbonisation of the wider UK transport system through modal shift. And by way of an example, the release capacity provided by HS2 could be used for more long distance freight services on the existing network. That would take lorries off the road. And rail freight reduces carbon emissions by 76% compared to road. So I've talked about the what and why of HS2, but our success will be measured not just on the infrastructure we build, but also how we deliver it. And that's why the HS2 programme has always been about building more than just a railway. So we're committed to delivering value for money. We have a responsibility to make sure that every pound we spend delivers wide benefits. But we've developed a set of strategic goals that help us focus on the benefits that we're promising to realise. So they include objectives on being a catalyst for economic growth and increasing capacity and connectivity. But they also include efforts to ensure that we create jobs for British companies, protect and preserve the environment. And a key part of that is reducing emissions from the construction and operation of HS2. We also want to set world-class standards for health and safety and make sure that we treat the local communities who will host our infrastructure with the respect and sensitivity to their concern. So we're developing a benefits register to track progress and a scorecard to measure the performance of our company, and we'll regularly report on our performance. And importantly, our suppliers are signed up to help deliver on these goals, and we'll hold them to account for what they deliver and the way that they behave. So just briefly, the stories so far. Already we have 10,000 people employed in our supply chain, 2,000 businesses have delivered work, and we have 400 new apprentices. We've awarded £5 million to community projects through our SEF and BLEF funds, and we've planted over 430,000 trees and created 50 new wildlife habitats. So in terms of how we're building HS2, we've awarded or are tendering the majority of our direct contracts for phase 1, the exception being the rail systems contracts. But of course, there are thousands of indirect supply chain opportunities, and there'll be more direct opportunities for phase 2A and 2B. And all of our contract opportunities are available online, and you can see who's been awarded contracts to date. So to give you an indication of the scale of HS2, HS2 is Europe's biggest infrastructure project, and in reality, even just looking at phase one, it's a portfolio of major national projects stitched together. So phase one alone is 216 kilometres long. It involves 75 kilometres of cutting, 63 kilometres of embankments, 16 kilometres of viaducts, and over 1 million tonnes of steel, 13 million tonnes of concrete, and we've got about 63 million cubic metres of excavated material to move around. So just to put that into context, phase one alone involves more tunnelling than Crossrail, requires substantially more concrete than Hinkley Point C, and involves significantly greater volumes of excavated material than Thames Tideway. So it's a massive project. And inevitably, a programme of this scale and complexity has the potential to have a substantial carbon footprint. But we are committed to working with our supply chain to minimise those emissions. And to minimise that carbon footprint, we need to first understand what it looks like. So what are the whole life carbon impacts of the programme? Where are the carbon hotspots? So those being the areas with the biggest impact and potential for carbon reduction. And we've been regularly assessing the carbon impact of the scheme. So whether that's been part of route appraisals, impact assessment, or design development. So we have a very good understanding of the programme carbon footprint. And this bar chart illustrates the whole life carbon footprint for phase one of HS2. So it includes carbon emissions from the extraction and manufacture of construction materials and products, their transport to site, construction activities, and then the in-use emissions associated with the maintenance, replacement, refurbishment of the assets, and the energy and water that's consumed to operate those assets. So we know that about 3/4 of the whole life carbon emissions are associated with the construction phase. So by the end of construction, the majority of the carbon impact for phase one will be locked in. There'll be no opportunity to avoid or reduce those emissions further. So carbon reduction performance during the delivery will be a critical determinant of our success. We can present the same information by contract or asset type, and you can see that the civil works account for the majority of the whole life carbon impact, and that the rolling stock rail systems and stations are not insignificant sources of carbon emissions. So what are we doing to minimise the carbon footprint? Well, first and foremost, we're embedding and advancing carbon management best practice. So this slide sets out the best practice framework which we're implementing for managing and minimising carbon emissions throughout infrastructure delivery. You might recognise it as taken from PAS 2080, which is a publicly available specification. And we're currently in the process of seeking independent accreditation to this best practice standard. So it's similar to ISO 14001 in that it's a management system, but it's specifically for carbon. So if we'd be only the second client organisation to be successfully accredited to the standard. So our carbon management strategy is industry leading, and leadership is a key enabler of carbon reduction. And we've been doing lots of great things in that space. So we've collaborated with other infrastructure client organisations to set our carbon reduction targets, to address common carbon reduction challenges. So for example, in relation to low carbon concrete, we've been working with industry partners to enhance carbon management capability in our sectors. Carbon performance is embedded in our procurement process, so it forms part of the evaluation criteria for relevant contracts. We're developing a KPI to incentivise and reward carbon reduction performance during the delivery cycle. But in terms of the key carbon management components, as I mentioned earlier, we do have carbon reduction targets. So the phase one civil and station contracts, they're required to reduce the whole life carbon footprint of their designs by at least 50%. And performance for those is measured against contract specific baselines, and the supply chain is required to monitor and report performance to us on a regular basis. We've also established a whole life carbon target for the rolling stock design and manufacture, and that's been included in the train technical specification. And additionally, all of our buildings, so our stations and depots, they're required to achieve nearly zero energy status. So that means that the buildings need to be highly energy efficient with on-site low or zero carbon energy generation. And then in terms of quantification, we've developed technical standards and rules that set out our quantification requirements. They mandate compliance with best practice standards and guidance. And to support our supply chain, we've aligned our reporting requirements with our information management, or BIM, requirements. And we've procured a lifecycle assessment tool, e-tool, which we're cascading into the supply chain to enable efficient and effective delivery of our requirements. So in terms of the more tangible design and engineering actions, this is the carbon footprint of the Euston to Old Oak Common civil contract. So the carbon footprint is presented by asset type on the left and material type on the right. It's the same information, just presented differently. So on the left, you can see that about 80% of the impact is associated with the bored tunnels, box structures, and shafts. And the majority of the carbon impact of those assets is associated with the construction products. So that's the purple parts. Carbon emissions from transport, so the green, and the yellow bars from the construction processes, they're common across all of the asset types. So there's a number of opportunities for carbon reduction there, whether that's local sourcing of materials, construction and logistics efficiencies, alternative modes of transport, low emission vehicles, low carbon fuels, and the like. And then on the right, you can see the same information, but by material type. And you can see that about 97% of the carbon impact is associated with the manufacture and transport and use of concrete and steel products. So armed with that knowledge, our contractor has been able to focus their carbon reduction efforts. And this slide shows some of the actions that they've implemented and intend to implement and their respective carbon impact. So to date, they've focused on build nothing and build less solutions. So for example, they've worked with tunnel ventilation specialists to improve their designs. That's allowed them to reduce the number of shafts and optimize the shaft designs. They've harmonized the diameter of their tunnels, which means they need fewer tunnel boring machines. And going forwards into the detailed design, they'll be looking at build clever and build efficiently solutions. And as I say, concrete and steel are key areas for carbon reduction. So they'll be looking at optimizing the concrete mix, in particular the opportunity to use low carbon concrete and reuse steel or steel with high recycled content. And then they'll also be looking at how they can procure low carbon electricity to power the tunnel boring machines. Our station designers, they've made significant progress in minimising the carbon footprint of the stations. This is the carbon footprint for Curzon Street. You can see that construction products and energy consumption in operation, they are key areas of focus for us. And Curzon Street station is set to achieve a 55% reduction in whole life carbon emissions. So the station will also be net zero carbon or achieve net zero carbon emissions from regulated energy consumption. So that's energy consumed to operate building integrated systems like heating, cooling and lighting. And they're achieving that through reducing energy demand and consumption, for example, by using LED lighting, and generating low carbon energy through close to 3,000 meters squared of solar panels on the platform canopies and ground source heat pumps. To reduce their construction products and whole life emissions, they're using prefabricated timber soffit units. So these are 27 times more carbon efficient than steel comparators. So they'll be installed in the main station roof. The paving in the public realm has been reduced in depth by 38% to 50 millimeters to reduce embodied carbon. And elements throughout the building have been designed for future flexibility and deconstruction. So for example, the main concourse has a high single span roof over 300 meters in length. That doesn't require any internal support through vertical columns, so space beneath can be adapted for future uses. And in addition, 100% recycled content steel has been used for the roof sections, and there's only 7 variations which will be bolted together rather than welded. And we've achieved similar successes at other stations, so Old Oak Common. They've undertaken a roof optimization study. Through that, they've been able to redesign to use 27% less material. That's a saving of over 1,000 tons of steel, carbon saving of 2,700 tons, and a cost saving of £7 million. And then finally, the rolling stock contract, which is currently out to tender. We can see that the majority of the impact is associated with the consumption of electricity to power the trains. So we've stipulated design features to minimise energy demand and consumption of the rolling stock. And the contract is structured to incentivise energy efficiency. And as I say, we're looking at our energy procurement strategy. How can we purchase low or zero carbon electricity to minimise those emissions in the operational phase? So thank you. Hand over to Neil.
Thank you, Mark. I'll put my presentation up. Okay, good morning, everybody. I'm Neil Waite. I'm the Air Quality Manager at HS2, and I'm going to run through our approach to air quality. That's going to include all the commitments we've made during the construction phase of HS2, a bit of update to how we're meeting those, some of our performance around those commitments, and then talk about some of the innovation projects we're doing, because we've got great scope, being, as Mark's outlined, you know, the biggest construction project in Europe, so we've got great opportunities to push the industry forward. Mark kindly has given you an update on what HS2 is, so I'll skip over that. But one of the things is, one of the key messages is really that we are also, as well as implementing best practice, looking at exceeding best practice. It's leaving a legacy for other projects as well. So if the biggest projects can't lead, then there's not much hope for the rest. So really it's responsibility of HS2 to push the industry forward and set new standards so the future projects have got a new aim to go for. In relation to our approach, we've got these set out in all our sort of environmental policies. So avoid, reduce, minimise, collaborate, and provide mitigation where we can't. So I'll put some information on those. So for the construction phase, we've committed to emission standards for all construction vehicles and all construction plant. I'll go into detail a little more in a moment on that. In relation, we've also got route-wide transport management plans. So it's not only the emission standards of the vehicle, it's how those are managed, not only from a safety point of view and driver training, about the logistics, so how they manage the vehicles in and out of sight. We've also committed to schemes such as clocks and fours. In relation to construction dust, which is, you know, a huge issue for the communities across the many cities we impact on, we follow current best practice. We've adopted the Institute of Air Quality Management guidance. So, for example, if any sites are medium or high risk, they're fitted with continuous monitors. The local authorities have live streams of that data. We set a trigger value, and I'll talk about that in a moment as well, which requires on-site immediate action. We then report that action to the local authorities, and then we also publish monthly reports on gov.uk, and those reports are divided into local authority areas. So we every month we're completing a series of reports for Birmingham City Council, Camden, Hillingdon, etc., along the route. And those are all publicly available, highlighting what monitoring's gone on, has there been any triggers, and if so, what action was taken. In relation to vehicles, so we've got a across-the-board standard that all HGVs, so we use over 3.5 tonne, all lorries have got to be Euro 6. These are commitments we made back in 2006 in the Parliament, 2016 during the parliamentary stages of phase 1. So we thought they were rather ambitious at the time. So Euro 6 across the piece. We do have exemptions available for specialist modified equipment. That they are an application on a case-by-case basis by the contractors to HS2. We've informed all the local authorities about those, and there's also a cap as well, minimising the amount of exemptions. But as you'll see in a moment, we have very, very few of those. For light-duty vehicles, so below 3.5 tonne, cars and vans, in everyday speak, again, Euro 6 diesel and Euro 4 petrol across the whole route. And in relation to construction plant, so non-road mobile machinery, again, we've got standards across the whole route. We are one step ahead of the GLA within London, and with the first project to ever require NRMM requirements outside of London. So we're currently stage 4 in the Central Activity Zone, 3B, Greater London and the rest of the route. And those will be moving up currently 2022 to stage 5 in the Central Activity Zone and stage 4 everywhere else. We also have exemption opportunities for NRMM, and we follow the GLA's exemption policy for that. So it's the same classification, viability modified short term as those. So how are we doing? So, I mean, Mark said we're doing the early works at the moment, such as demolition and preparing site, but even our early works are huge compared to any other project. So this year, as of last month, we've had over 50,000 HGV trips across the route. We're 98% compliant with Euro 6. We've had over 3,000 pieces of equipment on our sites this year, and we're 99% compliance. And just to give you a highlight on that, obviously we focus very much on that point and 1% non-compliance. We are very, very strict with our contractors because the communities and the local authorities that we construct in their areas expect that. So these non-compliances are things like they have to register their plant up front with us before it goes on site. So they may have gone on site compliant, but the registration may have been a couple of hours, a day late. That's a non-compliance in our book. They may have took the wrong plant to site, realised that, turned around and gone back again. It's not even been used, but we class that as a non-compliance. And some of these here are, for example, it might be modified HGVs used for drilling or utility work. If they haven't applied for the exemption in time, it goes down as non-compliance. We're sort of very strict on that. One of the really positive things is, I mean, our standards are part of the HS2 Act, and we have this concept called environmental minimum requirements. So our requirements are the minimum contractors should be doing, and therefore we've got targets, and we've also got commitments to sort of push beyond that. So out of this 3,000 pieces of construction equipment on site, 55% of it actually exceeds our emission standards. So in Greater London or the rest of route up to Birmingham, where we're 3A, that means we've got stage 4 or stage 5 plant on site now. And in the central activity zone, where we're stage 4, we've got a lot of stage 5 plants. We're also pushing for low or zero emission plant, and we've got a whole host. I mean, what we've found in reality is our supply chain are effectively using it as a competition to get the latest equipment on our sites first. We've got a photograph here of the first electric telehandler that was used in the UK. It was on one of our sites a couple of weeks ago. We did a press release around that. We've got a whole range. I've got some photographs at the end of hydrogen, fully electric, solar, hybrid equipment. We've got a lot of hybrid excavators on site. So we are really doing quite well in exceeding what were our original commitments. We have an innovation process at HS2. That's the sort of backbone of what we use across all environmental topics and engineering and safety, etc., to how HS2 can actually push things forward, move the industry forward. So I'm going to go through a couple of those. The message on innovation is our door is open. You know, we're willing to work with anybody that's got a new invention, a new idea, a new project that could improve any element across the construction phase. And here are some of the people we're working with. So it's a mix of universities, trade bodies, companies. So we've got a range of projects with all these people on the go at the moment. I'm going to highlight 4, I think. And these 4 projects are all at different levels of maturity. This one has been completed a couple of years. I mentioned a few slides ago, we follow the IAQM guidance, and we set the continuous dust monitors on our medium and high risk sites to the level of their guidance. A few years ago, we commissioned Gary Fuller, King's College, you may know him. Their environmental research group has recently passed over to Imperial to do a study on the construction dust trigger level. It used to be 250 micrograms per meter cubed on a 15-minute rolling average. The study is published at this link. The outcome of the study is that dust control can be improved. The level should be reduced from 250 to 190 and measured over an hour, not 15 minutes. And also that these monitors, typically Osiris, but there's other brands, aren't the best in the world. They are indicatively certified by MCerts, but that's still only 50% accuracy. We found a lot of them were breaking down, showing false triggers. So the study also recommended a series of QA measures that contractors should do to their monitors to get the best out of them, the accuracy. We submitted that study to the IAQM, and they subsequently adopted it into their best practice guidance. You'll see their revision, very small, 1.2 I think it is. So in October 2018, national best practice change. So all dust monitors now on site should be set at 190 for the 1 hour average, not 250 for the 15, and those QA measures adopted when managing those monitors and servicing them. So that's a sort of positive change for the whole industry, and all our sites the day this came out changed to those. We have got a project to reduce emissions for NRMM at HS2. We're working with, again, Kings and a series of contractors, Balfour Beatty, CSJV, Costain Skanska. This project's got a range of elements. We're doing some PEMS testing of construction plants, so a bit like VW, you know, VW scandal for cars. So we're doing sort of real life emission testing of construction plant on our sites. So what does a 3B give you in real world use? What does a stage 4 give you, etc., as opposed to what came out of the factory? We've got a stream of work looking at occupational exposure. So putting personal monitors on a range of operators, people on the site, people in the units on the site, and we're looking to develop a management plan. There's no NRM management plan the same way there is an on-road vehicles transport management plan. So we're looking to effectively develop that. The really interesting part of this project, which we're going to be conducting over the next couple of months, is we're looking to get certified the first stage 5 equivalent retrofit. At the moment, you can fit a certified diesel particulate filter onto a 3A and get 3B, but there's no stage 4 or 5 equivalent, because as well as the particulates, you need the technology to clean the gases as well. So we are effectively being a catalyst to getting that developed. We've got a company fitting a piling rig that's going to be used in Old Oak Common Station. It's going to be tested and submitted to Energy Saving Trust, the results in about a month's time. And we hope that's going to sort of move the industry forward, so suddenly there's a stage 5 equivalent retrofit available on the market. We've got another project with a company called Oak Tech. This is Innovate UK funded, and this is to be used on initially smaller construction plant like generators and welfare units in the offices you find on site. But this project is it's working with the UK car manufacturer, converting their petrol and diesel engines into LPG gas to use on construction sites. The emissions will be much cleaner than stage 5 construction plant, and we're also sort of building a circular economy element. So the same car manufacturer are making electric cars, or planning to make electric cars. They have very large batteries in them, need changing every couple of years, but when they're changed, they've still got about 60% power still in them, or capability. So those engines are going to pass over to the construction plant and then effectively convert whatever this LPG engine is powering into a hybrid system. They're also fitting heat recovery as well. So if these engines are going to power a series of site offices and welfare units on a site, they can run on the engine in the day, charge the battery off. If we're doing nighttime works, they can run off the battery silently, and then also heat the water and heat the units during the winter months. So the prototype for this is going on one of our sites in London in November. It's going to run all the way through the winter, and Imperial are doing the tests on it. So we'll keep people up to date on how that goes. But that was like a real good sort of potential reducing emissions and noise project. The next project, this is on the market now, the CEA, the Construction Equipment Association. If you see that red and black and white triangle, that is a CESA badge. You'll see it on 99% of all plant in the country. It was developed 12 years ago, and it's a security system. It's massively reduced construction plant theft and increased recovery. And there's a database that sits behind it, and there's a series of other technology that's on construction plant, not just the sticker. So we've worked with the CEA over the last 18 months to develop emission tagging, so a bolt-on to the security system, and that's the sort of green triangle there, and there's a different colour for stage 4, stage 3B, etc., and retrofit. So being the first project to require NRMM emission standards outside London, we did have a few issues, mainly that you look at a JCB or whatever, and you just cannot tell what emission class it is. a lot of the supply chain outside London have never been asked what emission class their own equipment was. They didn't know because no one ever asked them. And from assurance and safety point of view, you know, to check what a piece of equipment is, you need to move it to a safe place, stop it, let it cool down for a couple of hours, take all these plastic body parts off, get underneath the engine and have a look at the engine plant, and there's a long code, about 25 digits on it, and the 2 letters in the middle tell you what the engine plant is. So we did have a few teething issues when we first started early works back in 2017, that suppliers, people on the gate, people doing assurance on the site, us doing assurance on site, we couldn't easily tell what it was. So this is now available. It's had a really positive response. A lot of our supply chain are now retrofitting their vehicles, so they're adding the emission tag onto this. You should be seeing these on construction sites everywhere the rest of this year and certainly into next year. Manufacturers such as JCB, Hitachi, and now having discussions with Caterpillar are going to be fitting it at the factory. There's a database that sits behind it on the QR code, so it's effectively digitising plant as well. And we're also speaking to other people such as DEFRA. In the Environment Bill, it's been mooted that NRMM is going to be regulated nationally, but one of the blockers was how they enforce that. Does it come permitted? There's some sort of other licensing regime. So we in the CIA presented, well, you've got this scheme, the database behind it, it's effectively the national database for plant. So there's an options, cost virtually nothing for the trade, and gives us the best practice approach to regulation as well. Okay, so a few site photographs to finish, not the most glamorous photographs, but these are hydrogen tower lights. These have been really useful. For example, the work we've done over Euston Station the last 3 years, you may have, if you've been there, you've seen it. It's a very busy site, a lot of demolition to the left and the front of it. So we're obviously keeping the station open whilst doing all that demolition. So the walkways the public can go in are changing regularly. So it's been great to have these hydrogen tower lights, zero emission, no noise. People can just walk past them and not get a mouthful of fumes. So we've been using these a lot on site. These are hydrogen welfare units. We've been using these on site quite a lot. They're hydrogen power and have solar panels on the roof. So these have been great, straight in some of the rural areas where there's no power, so we're not using generators anymore. Dust suppression, this is the Ibis Hotel that used to be to the left of Euston Station as you look at it. So it's a long arm muncher, so it's a sort of reaches in and demolishes from the inside, so reduces dust. There's dust suppression on the grabber, as you can see there, there's dust there. Motor fog units that atomises water and effectively causes like an atomised water curtain to reduce dust. This is a hybrid excavator. I think we've got 13 of these on site at the moment. So those diesel powered to get it into where it needs to be. Once parked, it's an electric arm, and when it goes the other way, it charges itself. There's the excavator again. These are electric wheelbarrows. We had a huge tent at the back of Euston Station at St James's Garden where we had to exhume tens of thousands of bodies from an 1800 burial site. So it was over this massive tent about the size of one of our football pitches. So obviously occupational health, you know, we had loads of people working in there. So these electric wheelbarrows were moving up and down, making a stockpile, hybrid excavator to move the stockpile into the back of a wagon and then taken away. And that is it. So going forward, yes, as a project, we need to meet our environmental minimum requirements. We're doing that at the moment. We're exceeding that at the moment. Because of the length of HS2, you know, 10-year build plus, policy regulations are going to change. Now, we're one step ahead at the moment. We want to make sure we are one step ahead. And we're doing that while working with industry and our partners through our innovation process to sort of drive the next steps and set the next, what will be future best practice. It's not Richard, because he's at home with his baby. So I'll pass over to Temple for the final presentation.
That's right. Yeah, it'll be Alice. Thanks very much for that.
Hello, can you see my screen? Yep. Howard, can you see it? Yeah, great. Hi. Yes, I'm not Richard. I'm Alice. I work in the air quality team at Temple with Richard. I'm based in our Manchester office. So I thought I'd just run through with you about how we assist our clients to reduce emissions to air from their developments through the planning process, through construction planning, through construction phase and operational phase monitoring. I'd also like to introduce you to a tool that Temple has developed where different types of data are displayed on a single platform, and also talk to you briefly about COVID-19 and the risks and challenges for air quality. So how do we help our clients reduce emissions to air during the planning process? Well, we can provide advice at design stage to ensure that developments don't create street canyons, for example, where building configurations can sort of prevent effective pollution dispersion. We can also advise on the location of habitable rooms, suggesting maybe that habitable rooms are moved away from busy roads. We can advise on the siting of chimney stacks in relation to the buildings and stack heights and so on. We also advise on ventilation strategy, and we can advise whether proposed energy plant for the site, such as boilers and combined heat and power plant, meets emission standards. At the planning stage, we undertake air quality assessments to accompany planning applications, and these assess impacts during construction and operation. Our construction phase assessments look at the risk of dust emissions from demolition and construction activities on site, which might cause a loss of amenity due to dust soiling, or have health or ecological impacts due to increased particulate matter concentrations. We also consider emissions associated with the construction vehicles, on-road construction vehicles. Our operational phase assessments consider whether future users of a site may be exposed to existing poor air quality, which might affect their health. So that's basically just moving people to live in an area of poor air quality. And we also look at whether people who live around sites already, so existing receptors and residential properties, and also designated conservation sites, might be exposed to increased emissions from the development, usually emissions from centralised energy plant or boilers or vehicles. We consider the cumulative air quality impacts associated with other nearby developments. Again, that's construction dust and emissions from road and energy plant. If a development is in London, we'd also do an air quality neutral assessment to see whether the development complies with building and transport emission benchmarks. And if necessary, we'd suggest mitigation for the development. For construction emissions, these would be in line with the level of dust risk predicted by the assessment, usually following measures outlined in the Institute of Air Quality Management Guidance and non-road mobile machinery emission standards in London. For operational emissions, we look at provision of electric vehicle charging points, the type of energy plant on site, and whether mechanical ventilation with or without filtration is required for residential properties. In London, there are sort of mitigation measures required already. So developments in London must be air quality neutral for building and transport emissions, and there is a push towards them being air quality positive, but there isn't any guidance on how that should be achieved yet, or how that should be assessed. Also in London, solid biomass boilers and combined heat and power plants must meet emission standards, and non-road mobile machinery must meet emission standards as well, which are tightening from September 2020. And also 20% of car parking spaces should have an electrical charging point installed. So how do we help our clients reduce emissions to air during the construction phase? Well, we produce air quality and dust management plans before any construction or demolition works begin, but after the planning application phase. These provide instructions on how dust and pollutant emissions will be managed during the construction phase of the development. These plans usually include emission standards that non-road mobile machinery used on site will meet. They contain details of dust monitoring, which will have been agreed with the local authority. They'd also include details of site-specific mitigation measures, which would be based around the dust risk assessment that's been done for the site. And they'd contain a construction logistics plan. In a similar way to the ultra-low emission zone, there is an NRMM low emission zone in London that the previous speakers have mentioned, which requires that all engines with certain power ratings meet emission standards based on the engine emission stage. And most sites that are in the NRMM low emission zone will be required to log all machinery online using a London NRMM register. And the standards that they need to meet depend on where the construction site is, whether they're in the central activity zone or further out. But in response to COVID, there's been an exemption to the tighter emission standards proposed, so that these will now be between the 1st of September 2020 and the 28th of February 2021. So they've been slightly delayed. We also help our clients to reduce emissions during the construction phase by establishing construction phase air quality monitoring, which is usually required in London and is agreed with the local authority. This is usually dust monitoring, but it also includes PM10, and it might include PM2.5 and nitrogen dioxide. The type of monitoring depends on the existing air quality, pollution risks in the development, which are identified in the dust risk assessment, and the practicalities of monitoring. Real-time automatic monitors for PM10 are required for high-risk sites, and there's usually a 3-month baseline monitoring period. As Neil mentioned previously, there are trigger levels set for concentrations of PM10 at the sites, which have been set to prevent complaints from people living or working nearby, and so that site personnel can actively manage dust emissions when trigger levels are exceeded. And if they continue to be exceeded, it indicates additional dust controls might be required on site. Operational phase air quality monitoring is usually undertaken at facilities operating under an environmental permit, which need to demonstrate compliance with emission limit values detailed within their permit. It's not often a requirement for residential and mixed-use developments. Although we have done operational phase NO2 diffusion tube monitoring. We don't undertake stack monitoring, but we do monitor ambient odours by subjective sniff testing, which is a sensory test. I just thought I'd introduce you to our aerial online mapping tool. So Temple has developed the aerial mapping tool, which has been used for HS2 area-wide surveys. So for ecology surveys, water, arboriculture, soils and invasive species surveys, to provide a common data environment, giving all project members access to a single source of data. It's also been used for our Heathrow Community Engagement Board stakeholder engagement portal. And Aerial can be used to integrate multiple monitoring systems to pull data through to a single platform almost as soon as it's available, and it can provide multiple overlays of different monitoring data, so noise and air quality and so on, as well as site information and more. So it's a really useful tool for keeping track of different types of data. I thought I'd talk briefly about the risks and challenges of air quality in COVID. I know that, you could do a whole presentation just on this topic, so I just thought I'd sort of briefly run through some of these things. I don't know if you're aware, but Leeds, Bath and Birmingham City Councils have delayed the implementation of their proposed clean air zones until January 2021 at the earliest. And the Greater Manchester Combined Authority has confirmed that it will delay its clean air plans until 2022. The principal reason for this is the COVID pandemic, which has limited local authority resources, likely to result in severe economic recession. And also there's uncertainty as to the short and long-term impacts of the pandemic on urban air quality and human health. It is known that long-term exposure to air pollution reduces life expectancy, mainly due to cardiovascular and respiratory diseases and lung cancer. And short-term exposure to high levels of pollution can affect lung function, exacerbate asthma, and is known to increase respiratory and cardiovascular hospital admissions. We don't know what the long-term health implications are for patients hospitalised with severe COVID, especially if they've been on a mechanical ventilator. However, they are more likely to have increased risk of developing future illnesses, and they may be more susceptible to the effects of poor air quality. There is evidence that air pollution significantly increases coronavirus infections, hospital admissions and deaths, although there's not a proven causal link due to lack of data yet. Research indicates that small single unit increases in people's long-term exposure to pollution particles basically increases coronavirus infections and admissions by 10% and deaths by 15%. And that bit of research also took into account other factors, including population density, age, household size, occupation and obesity. So that's quite a worry. Research published in the journal Science of the Total Environment found that 78% of COVID-19 deaths in 4 regions in northern Italy and 1 around Madrid in Spain were in areas that had the highest NO2 concentrations and airflow conditions preventing dispersal of air pollution. As we all know, there's currently less people travelling and commuting to work, therefore emissions are lower. But on the flip side, those who are travelling are being advised to do so in private vehicles, as Andy mentioned in his presentation. If the shift from office to home-based working continues, it's likely that those working from home will be mainly within higher income areas. So although we could see a reduction in car trips around those areas, it's not likely to be the case for lower income areas where there's more reliance on using older vehicles. Thus, the age of the local fleet could increase with a higher proportion of older, more polluting vehicles on the road in these areas. There's also the uncertainty around the seasonality of COVID and the fact that certainly PM10 pollution tends to peak in winter months, which could coincide with another peak in coronavirus. Therefore, if COVID is here to stay, we really need to do everything we can to increase the resilience of the general population. And one of these would definitely be to improve air quality. Although it really looks like this might be on hold at the moment with delays to the clean air zones and the NOM low emission zones in London, and the lack of funding to incentivise demand and supply of clean vehicles and investment in greener forms of transport. That's the end of my presentation.
Fantastic. Well, I would like to say thanks very much to Andy, Mark, Neil and Alice for some really interesting, actually really went into some great detail there in terms of the wider kind of air quality and carbon effects and how actually innovation is key. And the various different sort of supply chain inputs and so on. So I'm going to be looking to ask a couple of questions. If you do have any further questions, I've got a couple come in, but either maybe raise your hand or just send some in the chat function. But okay, so got one from Polly. So I think this one's to Andy, because you're referring to some big wigs probably still driving into the into the city in their big gas guzzling cars. So do you expect that some of these companies that are encouraging their employees to use cars will actually get shamed, as it will probably be counterintuitive to their net zero commitment, particularly thinking perhaps around the kind of Canary Wharf area?
So that article wasn't addressed to just Canary Wharf. It was more addressed to, well, it was addressed to the city, but obviously Canary Wharf is a key portion of that. And wider central London office people. We saw it as a massive potential for shaming, which is why I wanted to include it. That's the first shot across the bows that we need to be doing more with our tenants to encourage them not to be just forcing or encouraging people to drive. And it's not just their private gas guzzling cars clogging up car parks that don't exist in the City of London. It's people getting Ubers, it's people getting taxis. So it's not just individuals' personal vehicles, but it's greater traffic on the roads. So I don't know if individual companies will be named and shamed, but I know the press is looking into it increasingly. I'm a very keen cyclist, and we're doing everything we can to increase cycling. One of the things I didn't talk about here, but I think I alluded to, was that yeah, we're encouraging trades to travel by car to keep them off public transport for the first kind of month or two of COVID, when there's no other traffic on the road. A lot of the time you've got gangs of 6, 8, however many labourers turning up in large vehicles. How do you prevent that? We're encouraging cycling, but cycling's really hard when you're wearing full PPE and you've got a hard hat as well as your bike helmet and a change of clothes, etc. So it's not an easy fix when you're talking about construction operatives coming to and from site. I think there's a little bit more flexibility about how many people you can fit in a car now. So we're getting back to probably half the levels we used to have in individual vehicles. But personal, talking about construction, not banks, but personal transport to sites, we're now encouraging people back onto public transport now that it's safe. We're still trying to encourage cycling. There's definitely more to be done, but yeah, we're trying to make sure that that kind of 1 to 2 month window where people were allowed to drive in, if they previously used other methods of transport, that they don't create bad habits, if that makes sense. But in terms of the kind of the city and the bankers and those types of companies, I very much think that they're going to feel that pressure, because it's those type of companies who do have zero carbon plans and all of that. So they'll be seen as being two-faced, I guess, if they take that approach. Hope that's
slightly hypocritical. Indeed. Okay, yeah, thanks for that. A couple of questions for Mark and Neil, I think, for HS2 perspective. One relates to, I mean, my ears sort of pricked up when I heard the mention of 430,000 trees being planted. And so, yeah, the first question, I guess, is nature-based solutions are one potential way of achieving, working towards net zero. Has there been any effort to try and kind of quantify the carbon sequestration of the planting? The adage of the right tree in the right place is particularly important, I think, there. And the other one relates to, you alluded to the fact that you're starting to use things like hydrogen power lights and hydrogen welfare units, which is particularly useful, I guess, when it's kind of off-grid. But I've also noticed that JCB have just produced the first hydrogen power excavator. So how much of a impact do you think that hydrogen technology will end up having, and what the kind of barriers to its kind of implementation at the moment?
Yeah, shall I take the question about the land use change? So we've assessed, as part of our environmental impact assessments, the impact associated with land use change and forestry. So those are the impacts. We understand those and we've reported those publicly. We're doing lots of work to minimise emissions from land use change and to maximise removals from carbon sequestration. We have a carbon minimisation hierarchy, and sequestering carbon is the bottom of that hierarchy, because we first want to avoid emissions in the first place and reduce them and use lower carbon energy. So where we are in the programme is we have a programme of work planned to optimise the carbon benefits associated with the Green Corridor, but our focus to date has been very much about, well, we need to reduce and minimise emissions in the first place. So that is where our a lot of our focus is at the moment, but we are still pushing forward work to make sure that we're planting the right types of trees, that they're resilient to climate change, so that we can achieve and deliver those carbon sequestration benefits as they grow, rather than just dying.
Okay,
thanks, Mark. I've just pinged, actually, just I mean, the wider bit about someone put a comment in there about the trees and the protesters, etc. So clearly it's not necessarily minor marks areas, but there's a huge piece of work at HS2 around ancient woodlands, about the tree planting, about the green corridor. Oh, sorry, put the camera on. About the green corridor that we're creating along the route. So I've just dropped a couple of links in the notes box there, just for some background information on that, albeit I'm certainly not a specialist in that area. In relation to alternative fuels, I mean, as I said, really through our innovation process, the door is open, and I gave a couple of examples there of where we've had a hydrogen kit on site. I'm aware of the JCB one. It's a hydrogen fuel cell, isn't it? We're hoping to look at some actual hydrogen fuel, as in a tank, on potentially on some vehicles and plant as well. So we're working with other companies who are developing this technology. It's a bit of a stepping stone, a bit like hybrid electric to electric. But really, our doors are open, and we are trying to push this. And you can be sure that the companies that are coming up with this technology are coming to us first to either have it on our site to use it as a springboard, use it on our site to do a brief study to show it works, which is what we did with the hydrogen-powered welfare unit. We did a 3-month trial, did a study to show the benefits of it, and then we pushed that out to the whole rest of our supply chain or other contractors. So it's sort of, yes, someone might do a prototype. Does it work in the real world? But really, can you scale it up? That's what we're sort of looking for. We've got other things in the pipeline. I think there's a 200 and 250 ton electric crane, the first in the world ever. That's supposed to be coming to the UK early next year. We're looking to place that on our sites. So as soon as somebody gets something, it seems to be they come to us first, because obviously we're the biggest project, and we certainly welcome people to do that. I want them to carry on doing it. We've got a whole range of 20 and 30 ton electric excavators. I mean, the thing at the moment is the electric stuff tends to be the smaller, but what we're seeing now is the pipeline is they are starting to ramp up. So a couple of years ago, it was like much smaller equipment, mini digger size. That's suddenly getting to the 20, 30 ton stage now. And now we're getting used that there's like 200 ton cranes. Again, with hydrogen, it's very much smaller plant at the moment, welfare units that we're hoping to scale that up as soon as we get the opportunity, really, and support the UK, PLC in bringing them companies through, show their technology works and ramp it up.
Yeah, no, exactly. I definitely can see that HS2 could be a springboard for testing innovations in technology and allow then the scalability up to a national scale. Okay, that's that answer. So a question from Mark Andy. So great that Canary Wharf Group are targeting the carbon emissions by 2030. I mean, when is the aim to actually get to net zero? What kind of scope? I mean, you may have covered it in presentation, but just to clarify, when you aiming to get to net zero, and what more do you think you need to do to get there, and the priorities?
I was just writing an email out in the chat, a message out in the chat. So thanks for actually asking the question, because it was already a very long, laborious response. So science-based target is a total carbon reduction. So it's a 65% total reduction by 2030, which includes our tenant-based emissions. So it's not just our scope 1 and 2, but it includes theirs. We've also signed up to the BBP climate change commitment, which is net zero by 2050, including all of the emissions associated with development, renovation, refurbishment, operation and maintenance. We've also set up signed up to the COP26 business call for action, which I believe was net zero by 2040 with a slightly different definition. So we have a number of different carbon levers that we're trying to follow. At the moment, our net zero total, including all of our operations and associated emissions with purchased goods and services and embodied carbon, is 2050. But we're now working hard to see how we can bring that forwards for a slightly more rationalized emissions profile. So rather than trying to touch literally everything that we touch will be net zero by 2050, but the COP26 business call for action one is a slightly more kind of rationalised discussion around that. In terms of our Scope 1 and Scope 2, we're already pretty much at net zero. We've got a very small amount of gas that we're looking to offset in the very near future. But, you know, Canary Wharf is 1,200 people. The estate is 120,000 people. We've got a pipeline of work of 30 projects over 15 years. So we could easily turn around and say we're net to Scope 1 and 2 now and spend, what, 50 grand on an offset. But we want to do something a lot more. What we're trying to do is obviously a lot bigger and broader than that. So I haven't fully answered your question because we haven't created our, you know, if it's going to be 2030 and what that looks like, but we've signed up to all of these much broader commitments, and we're releasing a net zero carbon pathway document by the end of this year, which is going to try and bring all of those different facets together in a kind of a clear, coherent way. Because as I'm sure most people are aware on this call, carbon is measured by different people doing different things with different what's it called, kind of endpoints. So a sprawling way to not answer a question, but we're trying to do as much as we can.
Great. Yeah, no, it's yeah, that's really helpful. I know what you mean. There are a lot there's a lot of different ways to measure and what to include, what to exclude, and so on. So yeah, it's events like this where we kind of share ideas and information. I think just helps to allow everyone to take a bit of a step forward in that.
Yeah, and around that, I think the reason why we haven't kind of jumped into setting an arbitrary like net zero of X by whenever target is because, you know, our supply chain is so critical in the development pipeline, but our development pipeline is what, 15 years, and then it's our management pipeline which is important after that. So it's understanding who our supply chain stakeholders are and how we can reasonably engage with them, you know, on that journey.
Okay, great. Quick question for Alice. So in light of what I was talking about in the intro, about the connection with the government's new obesity strategy, the new cycle lanes, air quality and COVID-19, and would there, do you think, in your opinion, be any kind of particular design measures that you'd recommend as being helpful for improving local roadside air quality? Obviously, the best way is to take cars off altogether, but if that doesn't happen, are there any kind of practical tips that local authorities, for instance, local community groups could introduce?
Hi, yeah, that's a good question. I think there's an opportunity to use use green infrastructure actually, you know, in an innovative way. So I think at regional and national scales, vegetation can remove air pollution, but at smaller scales, it's not that effective at actually removing pollution at street level. But if it's put in the right place, it can control the distribution of pollution and reduce public exposure. And there's no one size fits all solution. I think you know, interventions would need to be considered on a site specific basis, but there's definitely an opportunity there for using green infrastructure to maybe protect, for example, pedestrians and people using cycle lanes from pollution.
Okay, yeah, perhaps a little more separation, perhaps, between the congested roads and the new cycle lanes that they're trying to install. Yeah, quite a good one. Okay, so yeah, brilliant. I would just again like to thank everybody for a really interesting set presentations and questions. Just to remind people that we've got a couple of upcoming webinars in September, I think, including Women in Infrastructure. We're going to be exploring how public transport can make a comeback after the coronavirus lockdown, with a particular focus perhaps on social value. With future topics being planned on noise and acoustics and environmental impact assessment, but with particular reference to the forthcoming government's environment bill. So yeah, I will leave you all. So thank you all again for your time, and yeah, thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you all. Thanks.